A Flash in the Dark, Chapter 39, Defense. Barry set Felicity down and grinned before realizing that the blonde's shirt was smoking. Thinking fast, Barry unzipped the top of her costume and stripped Felicity out of her top and into the top of the Flash costume at super speeds. Caitlin entered the room, looking confused as Barry tried to put out the fire Felicity's shirt had turned into. "Guys, you remember Felicity," Barry said, stomping out the smoldering shirt. Cisco grabbed one of the small fire extinguishers off one of the desks and helped Barry put out the fire. "Barry started another fire, mark it down," he called. Barry stuck out her tongue at Cisco, but once the fire was out, she grabbed a marker and put a tally mark on a whiteboard that already had 7 tally marks under Barry's name. Felicity giggled. Caitlin grabbed a spare Star Labs t-shirt out of one of the desk drawers and stepped up to Felicity. "It is good to see you again, Felicity," Caitlin said with a wary smile. Felicity was still a bit confused about being suddenly out of her own shirt. "Sorry about your shirt, Felicity," Barry said with a wry grin. "It's okay. Ray'll get me a new one. This is actually really comfortable," Felicity said, gesturing to the top of the Flash costume, but then she frowned at Barry, who was in the pants of the suit and a sports bra. "Are you okay, though?" "Oh, yeah, they've seen me in less. Caitlin is my actual doctor, and Cisco had to take measurements for spare suits and bras and the like that wouldn't catch fire. They're used to it. I figured you would be more uncomfortable than I would," Barry explained, hands on her hips. "Thanks," Felicity blushed. Barry grinned and capped the marker. Caitlin handed Felicity the shirt. "As lovely as it is to see you, Felicity, I'm kind of curious as to why you're here," she asked with a frown. Felicity pulled out the boomerang and began to explain while Cisco bounced over to her, stars in his eyes, as he began to examine the boomerang. Caitlin tapped Barry on the shoulder. "Dr. Wells wants to talk to you," the doctor said with the air of a teacher sending a child to detention. Barry frowned slightly before shrugging and grabbing a shirt out of the drawer. Pulling it on, she passed Caitlin, heading back towards the labs, where she assumed Dr. Wells was waiting for her. She found him, and Joe, waiting. She paused. "Why do I feel like I'm in trouble?" she asked, her gut feeling putting her on the defensive. Dr. Wells leaned forward and motioned to one of the seats in the room. "You aren't, but we wanted to talk to you," Wells assured. Barry didn't sit down. "About what?" she asked, still feeling a little defensive. He sighed, and Joe stepped forward. "The arrow," Joe stated bluntly. Dr. Wells nodded. "We don't trust him," Wells stated. Barry's frown deepened. "You don't even know him," she insisted. Joe sighed. "I know that he's killed a multitude of people since he came on the scene. I know that there were about 12 outstanding warrants for his arrest in Starling City up until recently. I know that there have been 2 major terrorist attacks in Starling since he started operating," Joe listed. Barry tried to interrupt, but Joe got a bit louder. "I know he kidnapped you, Barry," he shouted. Barry held up a hand to stop Dr. Wells from asking questions he looked very eager to ask. "First of all, technically, Felicity kidnapped me. Granted, she used the Arrow's equipment to do it, but the point stands. Second of all of those warrants have been expunged. The police are actually working with the Arrow now, which is more than I can say for here. Don't think I don't know about Eddie's anti-Flash task force idea. Third of all, he saved a lot of lives during those attacks. So many more people would have died if he hadn't intervened." Barry snapped back. Joe raised an eyebrow. "So the people he killed before, they what, don't count?" he demanded. Barry pinched the bridge of her nose. "Joe, he's a good person. Maybe misguided and definitely a touch violent, but a good person," Barry said, shaking her head. "Barry, it's not that we don't trust your judgment. You may see him as a hero, but we don't. And he's certainly not the kind of person you should be looking up to." Dr. Wells wheeled forward. "He's a hero. I've seen him working. You two don't know anything about him." Barry's eyes narrowed dangerously. Their raised voices had drawn Caitlin's attention. "No, he doesn't do what you do. He carries out a dark reckoning for his city. I know that's not what you want." Wells said, shaking his head. Before Barry could respond, there was a shrill scream from the other room. Barry flashed into the cortex and ducked as the boomerang came sailing past her face. It zoomed around the room before striking a pipe and finally coming to a halt. Cisco peeked out of one of the labs just off the cortex. "That's on me." He raised a hand as Felicity peeked out from behind him. Joe put his sidearm away. "I want that arrow out of my city. Tonight," Joe demanded. Barry rolled her eyes and stomped off to the roof. Felicity followed her, eventually finding her on the roof, sitting on the edge of Star Labs, watching the city. Tentatively, she sat down next to the speedster. "What was all that about?" Felicity asked. Barry sighed and kept staring out over her city. It took a moment before she answered. "Dr. Wells and Joe don't trust the arrow. They don't want me to trust him. Also, I may have thrown you under the bus for my kidnapping the first time I was in Starling," she admitted. Felicity chuckled. "Well, it was my idea, but Diggle is a better shot than I am. I just carried your bags and wiped the security feed," she explained. Barry laughed and laid her head down on her friend's shoulder. "When did life get so complicated, Felicity?" Barry asked. Felicity took a moment to think. "For me, it's been years. It started the first time Oliver came into my office with an odd IT request. But it got weirdest when I found him shot in my back seat. I don't know how he folded himself into it, but I still haven't gotten all the stains out of the way." Felicity looked a bit nostalgic thinking about it. Barry laughed again. "Seltzer water and lemon for blood, or wear red," Barry instructed. Felicity blinked, looking thoughtful. Then she spotted something gold gleaming around Barry's neck. Barry looked down at what Felicity was looking at and blushed bright red. She pulled a locket out of where it had been hiding in her shirt, the chain long enough to allow this. It was a touch smaller than her hand and had an intricate snowflake carved on one side with a small sapphire in the center. Barry clicked it open and showed Felicity the pictures inside. One was a woman with the same long brown hair as Barry. The other was a man with her piercing eyes. "Your parents?" Felicity asked, and Barry nodded. "I like to keep them close when I'm out on the field, even if I can't have them close in any other sense," Barry explained. Felicity hugged her tight, and Barry returned the hug with a deep sigh. Felicity pulled back first, and the two women sat watching the city for a while. "Hey, did you ever open that box Oliver sent you?" she asked. Barry shook her head. "Nope, it's still sitting on one of my chairs in my tiny kitchen, staring at me every time I go home." "You should open it tonight." Felicity stretched. Barry raised an eyebrow at her, but Felicity put a finger to her lips. "I'm not going to spoil the surprise, but I believe I did promise to tell you about Huntress last time I saw you." Barry flashed back inside and grabbed a bag of snacks, not pausing to talk to anyone before she flashed back to the roof and sat back in front of Felicity, popcorn on one knee and Dove chocolates next to her, only slightly melty. Felicity laughed, and the women spent a wonderful few hours gossiping about their exes and their exes' former lovers.